Hello everyone, I'm Chris, and this is a full recap of Hocus Pocus, released in 1993. If you end up enjoying this video and want to see more from us, then make sure to click that subscribe button and click the bell to know anytime we upload a new video. Although Hocus Pocus was considered a flop during its original theatrical release in 1993, only bringing in around $39 million on a budget of $28 million, it's since become one of the most popular and rewatched movies around the Halloween season, and its sustained popularity over the last 29 years has now led Disney to release a sequel to the original film, Hocus Pocus 2, streaming on Disney Plus September 30th. So to prepare for the sequel, we're going to take a look back on the original 1993 film and recap everything that went down. But if you haven't watched Hocus Pocus already, make sure to go watch it first before continuing with our recap. The movie opens in 1963 Salem, Massachusetts, where we see a young man named Thackeray Binks jolting awake as what appears to be a witch runs across his window. Upon awakening, he notices his little sister Emily is no longer in her bed beside him, so he rushes outside to search for her, and from the woods he sees a cloud of violet smoke rising, which is a known sign that witches are conjuring, as well as Emily being lured towards it by the witch from outside his window, whom he promptly follows after, all the way to the witch's cottage. While peering through the window, he's nearly seen by three witches, Winifred, Sarah, and Mary Sanderson, who've captured Emily in an attempt to restore their youth as they brew a potion, transcribed in their book of spells that will enable them to suck out her life force. Just before they can have her drink the potion though, Thackeray interrupts, having crawled in through a window, and knocks Sarah and Mary down by hitting them with a large pot containing the potion, before pouring it out onto the floor. But as he goes to save Emily, he's incapacitated by Winifred, and the witches successfully steal her youth. They then turn their attention back to Thackeray, and rather than kill him, they conjure a spell that transforms him into a black cat and forces him to live forever with the guilt of having let his sister die. Immediately following his transformation though, the witches are confronted and captured by the people of Salem, led by Thackeray's parents who look to hang them for their crimes. But before they're killed, they conjure one last spell.
One All Hallows Eve when the moon is round, a virgin will summon us from under the ground.
And with that, the sisters are hanged, leaving Thackeray to spend his days watching over their cottage to prevent anyone from reviving them. 300 years later, in 1993, we see a teacher retelling this story to her high school students in the spirit of Halloween. But one student, Max Dennison, doesn't believe the tale to be true, even claiming that Halloween was just invented by the candy companies, though his latter claim is shut down by his classmate Allison, who informs him that Halloween is based on the ancient feast called All Hallows Eve, the one night a year where the spirits of the dead can return to Earth. In response to getting put in his place, he boldly asks for her number, but she turns him down, and later on his way home, he gets stopped by a couple of bullies, Jay and Ernie, although Ernie prefers his nickname Ice.
This is ice.
These two idiots harass Max for some smokes and cash, but he has neither, so instead they just steal his shoes. And getting robbed as well as being turned down by his crush only adds to his building frustration after being forced to recently move to Salem from Los Angeles. And he's angered even more after learning he has to take his younger sister Danny trick-or-treating, since his parents Dave and Jenny Dennison are going to a party at Town Hall. While they're out collecting candy, Max once again runs into Jay and Ice, who've been spending their Halloween stealing candy from other kids, and they attempt to steal Danny's as well. So she threatens them with her older brother, but Max doesn't plan on picking a fight and just gives them his half of the candy. Furious that she just embarrassed him in front of apparently half the guys at school, Max yells at her, prompting her to run off crying, so he quickly apologizes, excusing his anger as being caused by homesickness, and she ultimately forgives him. So they continue on trick-or-treating, with the next house they end up at turning out to be Allison's, who begins discussing the Sanderson sisters once again after Danny claims to have just learned about them in school, and reveals that her mom actually used to work at the Witches Museum before it was shut down due to some spooky things happening there. Looking to still get it in with Allison, Max suggests that the three of them check out the abandoned Sanderson house, and she agrees, so they make their way to and enter the cottage, but aren't really able to see anything due to the darkness. Luckily though, Max finds a collection of lighters, one of which he uses to find the light switch, allowing them to see the witch's ancient relics, such as Winifred's book, which Allison claims had been given to her by the devil himself. Max also spots what Allison explains to be the black flame candle, which legend says on a full moon can raise the spirits of the dead when lit by a virgin on Halloween night. But Max still doesn't believe any of this stuff is real.
Oh, come on. It's just a bunch of hocus pocus.
He said it! He said it!
So he suggests lighting the flame, but before he can, he's attacked by a black cat, which is actually Thackeray Binks, hoping to prevent the witch's resurrection. Max manages to get it off him though, and decides to light the flame anyway, despite his sister's pleas not to, resulting in the cottage getting all sorts of spooky, and the sisters making their long-awaited return, forcing the kids into hiding. The witches soon recognize their presence though, with Mary sniffing out Danny's location, but before she can suffer the same fate as Emily did all those years ago, Max jumps out to confront them, only to be quickly subdued by Winifred, but her persistent attack prompts Allison to attack Mary with the witch's broom in a frying pan, while Danny puts a stop to Winifred by whacking her and Sarah with a bag of candy. Before they can counterattack, Winifred is ambushed by Binks, allowing Max to regain consciousness and distract the witches by tricking them into believing the sprinkler is the burning rain of death. This gives him an opening to make a run for it, but he slips on the way out and is confronted by Binks.
You can talk.
No kidding.
So after taking their spellbook at the behest of Binks, the two escape the cottage and join back up with Allison and Danny. The witches eventually realize they've been fooled, and upon realizing their book had been stolen, they head out to hunt the kids down, as in order to gain eternal life, they'll need to recreate their potion and suck the life force out of the children of Salem, since if they don't before sunrise, the spell that brought them back will wear off, and they'll be sent back to their grave. Meanwhile, Binks has brought the children to a graveyard, since the witches are unable to step foot on hallowed ground, and explains the backstory of one headstone in particular, that being William Butcherson, who'd been killed by Winifred after he was caught cheating on her with her sister Sarah, so she poisoned him and sewed his mouth shut. Binks then explains the book's purpose, with it containing each of Winifred's most dangerous spells, and that they must not let her get it. So to prevent that from happening, Max attempts to burn it, but it doesn't work due to it being protected by magic. Just then, the witches arrive, flying in on their brooms, but since they're unable to set foot in the cemetery, Winifred instead casts a spell that revives her old lover Billy, and sends him to chase after them in the book, forcing the kids to hide in the sewers, though not before Max knocks off Billy's head with a tree branch. The witches attempt to sniff them out, but the children are too far to be detected, so while Billy searches through the sewers, they begin searching for children to capture. This whole ordeal has proven stressful thus far though, so they take part in a calming circle, which is quickly interrupted by a bus approaching. But the driver appears to have the hots for the trio, specifically Sarah, so he gives them a ride into town and even allows Sarah to control the wheel. As she's driving, the kids begin making their way back above ground through a sewer drain, with Binks exiting first, but just as he does, Sarah comes speeding down the road and runs him over, momentarily killing him before he quickly regenerates, since his curse won't allow him to die. Meanwhile, the sisters exit the bus after Mary declares she smells children, but once outside, they're unable to find any, confused by their Halloween costumes. Fearing that she's lost her powers, Mary begins having a mental breakdown, but their luck soon looks to have made a turn for the better when they stumble upon what they believe to be the home of their master, but is actually just a guy dressed up as Satan. Winifred soon realizes this, as well as why all the children are wandering around in costumes, with All Hallows Eve having become a night of frolic, as she describes it, and her frustration is compounded after finding their brooms gone, with them having been stolen earlier by 3 young girls dressed in Sanderson's sister costumes. But luckily, they receive some good news, with Mary once again being able to smell Max, Danny, and Allison, who throughout this have made their way to the party at Town Hall to hopefully get some help from his parents. But they have a hard time believing their story about 300-year-old witches, and before he can convince them it's true, the witches arrive at the party as well. So he jumps on stage to warn everyone they may be in danger. But Winifred just plays it off as an introduction, and begins a musical performance of her own version of I Put a Spell on You. And this performance literally does put a spell on the audience, and forces them to continue dancing until they die. The kids are luckily able to escape before they can be trapped in a never-ending dance though, and manage to come up with a plan, first luring them into their high school.
It reeks of children. It is a prison for children.
And tricking them into entering the school's pottery kiln, which they then lock them inside of and burn to their presumed death. So the heroes celebrate their victory and return to Max's house, with him and Danny taking in Binks as their family pet, and Max also appears to have finally gained the interest of Allison, who he snuggles up to as they fall asleep. But as they're sleeping, the witches are revealed to have survived their attack, and once again head out to hunt them down, leading to an encounter with Jay and Ice, in which Jay calls the sisters ugly, so they take them back to their cottage and trap them each in a cage. There, Winifred calls for her book to let its presence be known in a last-ditch effort, and it actually works, as back at Max's, he and Allison had awakened and began looking through the book, although they'd been told not to open it earlier by Binks, in hopes of finding a way to help him return to his human form, which they're ultimately unable to do, though they do learn that salt can be used as protection against the witches. And Allison takes advantage of this fact, once the witches arrive on a new pair of brooms along with a vacuum for Mary. But it doesn't help her stop them from knocking out Max and capturing Danny, Binks, and the book. And as the witches head back to their cottage, Sarah sings a song that casts a spell on all the children of Salem and lures them to their home. And once there, they're finally able to recreate the potion. But luckily, Max and Allison arrive just as they're about to force Danny to drink it. And Max once again tricks them, convincing them that the light from their car is actually the sun rising. So he's able to rescue Danny and Binks and pour their potion out onto the floor before driving off, with the witches only realizing they've once again been fooled as they're leaving. But luckily for them, there's still enough potion for one child left, which they could use on one of the children they've lured to the cottage with Sarah's song. But Winifred still wants to go after Danny since she called her ugly. So once again, they chase after the kids, but their attacks are thwarted by their vehicle, and the kids are able to make it back to the graveyard, where they're quickly met by zombie Billy, who Winifred orders to kill Max, but instead, Billy takes his knife and cuts open his sewed mouth to berate her for poisoning him as he joins the side of the heroes. In an attempt to protect Danny, they place her in Billy's grave with a circle of salt surrounding her, while Max arms himself with a baseball bat that is snatched away from him rather quickly on his first swing attempt by Winifred, who then tackles him to the ground before shifting her attention to Danny, who's under Billy's protection, so she leaves him headless once again with a flying kick to the face. Seeing her new friend wounded, Danny crawls out of the hole and hands him back his head, but this just gives the witches the perfect opening to swoop down and snatch her up. Luckily, Binks is able to leap up onto Winifred just before she forces the potion onto Danny and knocks it out of her hand to be caught by Max. In response, Winifred launches Binks onto a rock below and demands for Max to give her back the veil or she'll kill Danny. So Max instead drinks the potion and gives himself up to save her. But as Winifred begins sucking out his life force, he nearly knocks her off her broom to the hollowed ground below. So Sarah and Mary rush over to help, but are stopped by the kids as they grab onto the wire of Mary's vacuum and send the two witches flying, giving Max the opening to knock Winifred to the ground. She doesn't succumb to the ground's effects right away though, and once again attempts to suck out his life force. But soon enough, the hollow grounds turn her to stone before she's then turned to dust along with her two sisters as the sun rises. And with their defeat, Billy returns to resting in his grave, while the kids discover that Winifred's attack on Binks had proven fatal, which initially leaves Danny heartbroken, until they're met by Thackeray's spirit, who expresses his gratitude for finally setting him free to be with his family and sister once again, who we see calling for him out in the distance. So he says his final goodbyes and he heads off into the afterlife with Emily. Meanwhile, we see the witch's other spell at Town Hall has finally been lifted as well, as those who'd been in attendance, including Max and Danny's parents, make their way back home. Jay and Ice are still left locked in their cages inside the witch's cottage though, alongside the Book of Spells, and the movie ends with it ominously opening its eye below them. And that was our recap of the original Hocus Pocus. If you enjoyed our breakdown of it, then make sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel for more film content like this. And if there's any other Disney movies you may have grown up with that you'd want us to cover, make sure to leave those listed in the comments below. Once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll talk to you again soon.